The day I found out my husband had been lying to me for 3 years, I was standing in the break room at work, eating a sad little cup of yogurt and scrolling through his texts on a phone he didn't know I'd seen. I wasn't snooping. Not really. He'd left it on the kitchen counter that morning, screen up, and the message had flashed across it before I could look away. Just 4 words from a number saved as R. Hendricks, contractor. 4 words that made my stomach drop through the floor. Pay your father's instructions. My husband didn't have a father. That's what he told me when we first started dating. That his dad had walked out when he was 7 and never came back. That his mother had raised him alone, working double shifts at a grocery store in Cincinnati. I had held his hand in the dark and felt so much tenderness for that story. I had loved him, in part, because of that story. Now I was standing in the break room at Heir Financial, a mid-size accounting firm in downtown Columbus, Ohio, and I could feel the yogurt going sour in my stomach. His name was Blake. My husband's name was Blake Whitmore. Or at least, that's the name I'd been introduced to at a mutual friend's dinner party 4 years ago. That's the name on our marriage certificate, on our joint checking account, on the lease for our apartment on Fielding Street. Blake Whitmore, 31 years old, junior project manager at a construction logistics company, son of nobody. Except apparently he was someone's son after all. I should back up. I'd been at Heir Financial for 2 years when everything started to unravel. I was a mid-level financial analyst, nothing glamorous, but I was good at my job and I knew it. I ran projections, reviewed reports, caught errors that other people missed. My boss, a dry but fair man who'd been with the company for 20 years, had told me just 6 months earlier that I was on track for a senior position. Then the new management came in. The acquisition happened quietly. The way these things always do. A memo on a Monday morning, some shuffling in the corner offices, a few people suddenly working from home, indefinitely. Hargrove was bought by a holding company called Whitmore Capital Group. I didn't think anything of it at the time. Whitmore is a common enough name. I'd been married to one for 2 years, but I'd never heard Blake mention any family business. He'd told me his mother passed away the year before we met, that he had no siblings, no cousins he was close to, no one, just him. The first person to make me uneasy was a man who arrived on a Tuesday in late March. He walked through the office like he owned it, which I would later understand he essentially did. Mid-30s, expensive suit, the kind of easy confidence that doesn't come from working hard, it comes from never having been told no. People straightened up when he passed. Our HR director actually laughed too loudly at something he said and then looked embarrassed about it. His name was introduced to us in a company-wide email the following day. Preston Whitmore, incoming VP of Operations, representing the parent company's interests during the transition period. Preston Whitmore. I read that email 3 times. Then I went to the bathroom, locked the stall, and sat there for a full 5 minutes breathing carefully. When I got home that night, Blake was making pasta the way he did on Tuesdays. I watched him from the doorway of the kitchen. His back to me, humming something low, completely at ease. And I thought, ask him. Just ask him. How was your day? I said instead. Fine, yours? There's a new VP at work. His last name is Whitmore. Blake didn't turn around. The humming stopped for exactly 1 beat, then resumed. He said. Small world. I let it go. I told myself I was being paranoid. That was my first mistake. Preston made himself known in the office fast. Within a week, he'd restructured 2 departments, let go of 3 people whose work I knew for a fact was solid, and instituted a new reporting chain that put him between my team and our previous director. Every decision now had to go through him. He was charming in the way that people who've practiced charm can be. He remembered everyone's names, asked about your weekend, made you feel briefly seen. That there was something underneath it that I couldn't shake. A watchfulness, a way of cataloguing every reaction in a room. He reminded me of someone who was very good at a game no one else knew they were playing. The first time he singled me out, I thought it was routine. You're the one who flagged the dent in account discrepancy last quarter, he said, appearing at my desk like he'd materialized from nowhere. Before the acquisition. That's right, I said. Sharp catch, that would have cost us. He smiled. I like people who pay attention to detail. I thanked him and he moved on. But I noticed after that he would sometimes stop near my desk when he was walking through the office, not always stopping to talk, just pausing, like he was checking on something. I mentioned it to my closest friend at work, a woman named Cassandra who'd been with the company longer than me and had survived 3 different management regimes with her sanity largely intact. Is either interested in you or suspicious of you, she said, unwrapping her lunch with the calm of someone who had seen everything. Neither one is great. Why suspicious? I asked. She shrugged. New guy comes in, wants to know who the real players are. You're good at your job and you don't make a big deal about it. That makes some men nervous. I thought about that for the rest of the afternoon. And then I thought about Blake. And then I thought about the name on the email and about the way Blake's humming had stopped for one single beat. That night I went through his phone. The text from R. Hendricks was 3 days old, sent at 11:22 on a Saturday morning when I'd been at the gym. Per your father's instructions, the Q2 review is being pushed. You'll want to adjust your timeline accordingly. There were more messages going back months, references to the transition, references to your position once things settle, references to something called the Whitmore Family Trust. I sat on the bathroom floor for a long time. My husband had known. He had known that his family, a family he told me didn't exist, was buying the company where I worked. And he had said nothing, not when the acquisition was announced, not when Preston Whitmore's name appeared in my office, not once. I put the phone back exactly where I'd found it. I went to bed. I lay in the dark next to a man I'd slept beside for 3 years, and I thought, with a strange, cold clarity, I need to understand exactly what I'm dealing with before I say a single word. So I started paying attention. It didn't take long once I knew where to look. I found the Whitmore Capital Group's public filings on the SEC's database. It was a privately held subsidiary, unlisted, but with registered documents going back 12 years. The principal officers listed were a man named Gerald Whitmore and 2 others. One of them was Blake A. Whitmore. Not a coincidence, not a common name. My husband was listed as an officer of the company that had just bought my employer. I cross-referenced everything I could find: property records, business registrations, a LinkedIn profile for Gerald Whitmore that listed him as founder and chairman of a holding group with interests in commercial real estate, financial services, and logistics. Blake worked in construction logistics. I'd thought that was just a job. It was his family's industry. Gerald Whitmore had 2 sons. The older one, Preston, was his right hand, visible, vocal, the face of the operation. The younger one, Blake, was listed with no photo and a minimal bio. He was what you might call the quiet asset, the one you don't notice until you need to. I thought about the texts again, per your father's instructions. Someone had been using my husband to keep an eye on things from the inside of our marriage, or Blake had chosen to do that on his own. I didn't know yet which was worse. I went into work the next morning and I did my job. I sat at my desk and I ran my projections and I answered my emails and I smiled at Preston Whitmore when he walked through the floor and he smiled back, and neither one of us let on that we were anything other than what we appeared to be. But Cassandra noticed something. You look like you're doing math in your head constantly, she said over coffee. I'm always doing math in my head. Different math, she said, more personal. I told her then, not everything, just enough, that I'd found something that suggested my husband had a connection to the acquisition that he'd never disclosed. Cassandra was quiet for a moment, turning her coffee cup in both hands. What are you going to do? She asked. I don't know yet, I said, but I'm not going to do anything stupid. She nodded slowly. You need documentation. I know. And you need to be careful, she said, because if Preston Whitmore figures out that you know something and he gets there before you're ready. I know, I said again. I had 2 weeks before the quarterly review. 2 weeks before Preston would be presenting a new organisational structure to the board. 2 weeks, according to the texts I'd seen, before Blake's position became official. Whatever that meant, I intended to find out before it happened. I called my sister that weekend while Blake was out running, which he did every Saturday for exactly 45 minutes. She lives in Portland now, 3 time zones away, and she is the most relentlessly practical person I have ever known. She works as a paralegal and has zero patience for drama and exactly the right amount of patience for logistics. I told her everything. The silence on her end lasted about 8 seconds, which for her was a long time. "Okay," she said finally. "First question, do you still love him?" I had expected her to ask about the legal angle or the financial exposure. The question caught me off guard enough that I answered it honestly. "I don't know what I love," I said. "I don't know who he is." "That's fair," she said. "Second question, are you still on his health insurance?" I laughed in spite of everything. "Yes." "Don't do anything that changes that until you have a plan," she said. "Now tell me again about the SEC filing." We stayed on the phone for 2 hours. By the end of it, I had a list. Documentation to pull together. Conversations to have and not have. My sister gave me the name of an employment attorney she trusted, a woman who specialized in fiduciary cases and, incidentally, divorce. "Just to have the number," she said, "just in case." I wrote the number in my personal notebook, not my phone. Old habit. The moment things broke open came on a Wednesday and it didn't happen the way I planned. I was staying late to finish a report, genuinely late, not strategically late, when I heard voices in the conference room at the end of the hall. The door was ajar. I wouldn't have stopped except that I heard my name. "She's been there 2 years and she's flagged more issues than anyone on that floor." Preston's voice. "If we're restructuring her department, she's the one we keep." A pause, then a voice I recognized in a way that made my whole body go still. "She's not going to stay once she understands what the restructuring means," Blake said. "She'll leave on her own." I stood in the hallway and I understood, in one terrible and clarifying moment, that my husband was not the quiet innocent in this situation. He wasn't being used without his knowledge. He was in that room, in that building, part of a plan that involved me, and he had been lying to my face every single night for God knows how long. I walked past the conference room door. I didn't stop. I took the elevator down, got in my car, and drove around Columbus for 40 minutes because I didn't trust myself to go home yet. When I did go home, Blake was already there. He'd made dinner. He asked how my evening went. I said, "Long. Lots of work." I ate dinner, and I watched him talk about a podcast he'd been listening to. And I thought, 2 can play at this. I moved fast after that. I met with the employment attorney my sister had recommended, a no-nonsense woman who had clearly heard more shocking things than my story before her first cup of coffee. She laid out my options with the same tone you'd use to explain a spreadsheet. Wrongful restructuring, conflict of interest, non-disclosure obligations. There were protections available to me, she said, but the window for exercising them was connected to timing. I needed to move before the quarterly review. I also reached out quietly to 2 board members whose contact information I'd found in the company's original pre-acquisition directory. One didn't respond. The other responded within 20 minutes and said she'd like to meet. Her name was Delphine. She'd been on the Hargrove board for 6 years, predating the acquisition, and she was not, I would quickly learn, someone who was happy about how things had gone. She was in her early 60s, direct, and she had already been asking questions about the Whitmore transition that she wasn't getting answers to. I brought her every document I had, the SEC filings, Blake's connection, the timeline, the text messages. I'd screenshot them the morning after I'd found them from my own phone. Delphine looked at everything carefully, then she looked at me. "You've been living with this man," she said. It wasn't a question. 3 years, I said. "And you came here anyway?" "Yes." She nodded like I'd passed some kind of test I hadn't known I was taking. The quarterly review happened on a Thursday. Preston walked in with exactly the confidence of someone who expected no surprises. He had a presentation. He had a restructuring plan. He had Blake sitting 3 seats down the conference table in the role of transition consultant, a title I was only seeing for the first time on the attendee list that morning. I sat at the other end of the table. When Preston reached the slide that outlined the new organizational structure, the one that quietly folded my team into a division that would effectively be managed by someone with no background in financial analysis, Delphine spoke. She asked Preston to stop on that slide. She asked him to explain the reporting chain. She asked him, in a voice that was perfectly level, to address the fact that a listed officer of the parent company had been employed within the acquired firm's organizational structure without disclosure to the remaining independent board members. Preston's smile didn't falter, but something behind his eyes did. And then Delphine said, "I'd also like to ask Mr. Whitmore, the other Mr. Whitmore, to clarify his relationship to the acquiring entity. Specifically, whether his spouse was employed here prior to the acquisition and whether that relationship was disclosed to anyone in this room." Every head in the conference room turned. Blake was looking at the table. I was looking at Blake. He raised his eyes to mine, and in 3 years of marriage I had learned to read his face very well. What I saw there was not guilt exactly. It was something more complicated than that, the look of someone who has been telling themselves a story about why what they're doing is acceptable and who has just run out of story. "No," he said finally, "it wasn't disclosed." The next few weeks were not easy. I won't pretend they were. The restructuring plan was tabled pending an independent review. Preston was reassigned to a different division pending the board's inquiry. 2 employment attorneys were now involved, neither of them mine. Blake and I had the kind of conversations that are too honest and too exhausting to repeat in full. He told me things I hadn't known, that his father had pressured him to move to Columbus 2 years before we met, that the intention had always been that he would be positioned within whatever company Gerald eventually acquired, that he had genuinely not planned to meet me, had not planned to fall in love, and had spent 3 years trying to figure out how to tell me the truth without losing me. "You lost me by not telling me," I said. He didn't have an answer for that. I moved out 3 weeks after the board meeting. I stayed with a friend until I found a sublet on the other side of the city. My sister flew out for a weekend and helped me carry boxes and did not say "I told you so," which was the kindest thing she could have done. The employment situation resolved in a way my attorney considered favourable. My position was formally reclassified with a title change and a salary adjustment that reflected what my work had actually been worth. Cassandra got a similar correction on her title. The 2 colleagues who'd been quietly pushed out during the transition were contacted and offered settlements. I won't say the money fixed anything. It didn't. But there is something about having your work correctly valued after a period when someone tried to quietly make it worthless that matters in a way that's hard to articulate. It felt like being told by something official and external that I had not been wrong about myself. 6 months later, I was having lunch near my new apartment, a diner I discovered on my morning walks, the kind of place where the coffee is not good, but there's a lot of it, and the woman who worked the counter on weekdays remembers your order. Her name was June, and she was working 2 jobs and putting herself through a paralegal certificate program at night. And I knew this because I had made a habit of actually listening when she talked. That day I left a tip that was larger than my check, not because I was showing off, because I could, and because she was the kind of person who worked hard in a way that nobody in a corner office ever noticed, and I knew exactly what that felt like. She looked at the bill and then looked at me. "You sure?" she said. "I'm sure," I said. I walked back to my office in the October sun, leaves going gold on the sidewalks of Columbus, Ohio. I was 31 years old. I had a job that paid me what I was worth. I had a sister who flew across the country when I needed her, and a friend who noticed when my math looked personal, and an attorney whose name was in a notebook I'd been smart enough to keep. I had built a life that was entirely, genuinely mine, and I was only just getting started. I keep thinking about that Tuesday morning in the break room, yogurt in one hand, a stranger's text message on my husband's screen, and the ground dropping out from under everything I thought was solid. People ask me if I'm angry. The honest answer is that anger came and went fast. What stayed longer was the grief of realizing that the version of my life I'd been living, the apartment on Fielding Street, the Tuesday pasta, the man who hummed while he cooked, had been built on a foundation I was never allowed to inspect. That's a particular kind of loss. Not dramatic, just quiet and heavy and very hard to put down. But here's what I've come to understand about what happened and about myself inside it. Blake made choices that hurt me, but so did I, every time I noticed something and chose the comfortable explanation over the true one. The beat of silence when I mentioned Preston's name. The way her small world landed wrong and I let it. There's a version of integrity that isn't just about not lying to other people. It's about not lying to yourself. About having the honesty to look at what's right in front of you, even when the looking is going to cost you something. I didn't do that soon enough. When I finally did, it changed everything. And then there was the thinking, the 2 hours on the phone with my sister, the SEC database at 11 at night, the notebook with the attorney's number written in pen, not saved in my phone. None of that was dramatic. It wasn't instinct or luck. It was just paying attention, doing the work of actually understanding a situation before reacting to it. My job had taught me that you don't make decisions on incomplete data. You pull the filing, you check the source, you follow the number until it tells you the truth. I applied the same discipline to my own life, and it was the only thing that gave me any real power in a situation where someone had tried very hard to make sure I had none. The third thing is harder to name. There was a morning, about a week after I moved out, when I sat in my sublet with a cup of bad coffee and thought I could just be done. Done fighting, done documenting, done pushing. Just walk away and call it a lesson. And I almost did. The tiredness was real. What kept me going wasn't rage, and it wasn't pride. It was something quieter, a refusal to accept that the work I had done for 2 years was worth less than someone with the right last name decided it was. That refusal is a muscle. You build it by using it. Cassandra used it every day for years before I ever walked into that office. Delphine had been using it in that boardroom for 6 years. I was just the newest person learning how. I left a large tip for June at the diner that October afternoon, not because I was being generous. I did it because I remembered what it felt like to do good work that no one with power acknowledged. I wanted to be the person who acknowledged it. That felt more than anything else in that whole long year, like exactly who I wanted to be. The life I have now is quieter than the one I thought I had, but it's actually mine. I know what it's built on. I checked.